Hello everybody and good morning. Welcome to the Top Producer Show. So our mission is to educate, equip, and train servant leaders. Our vision is to create financially independent achievers, and our purpose is to help people grow. And right now we're finishing up the chapter of Risk, Chapter 4. It's a long chapter, so we did have to put it into 3 sections. But there's so much information that we didn't really want to miss anything, so we wanted to split it up. Little update, Jeff's dad is doing well. He came out of surgery okay. The doctors wanted us to monitor him for 24 hours, so that's why Jeff's not here. He'll probably be here a little towards the end of the show, but he spent the night at Dad's last night just to make sure everything's okay, so he'll probably pop in at the end. So, before we get started on this next chapter, let's go ahead and invite some people onto here. Alrighty, and here we go. Good morning, David. Good morning, Chance. Hey, Bill. Alrighty, let's get started here. So we are on the baby boom bust. So in the United States, there's approximately 75 million baby boomers ready to start collecting Social Security and Medicare. So Japan, England, France, and Germany have the same problem. Baby boomers are collecting on promises that their countries cannot keep. So if 75 million American baby boomers collect just $1,000 a month in Social Security and Medicare benefits, this is an additional $7.5 billion in monthly payments from the government. And obviously, the printing press is just going to be constantly running and cranking out checks without the money in the bank. So this is why debt-free is an oxymoron, even if you are debt-free. So there's a bunch of questions that he's going to go over in the end of this chapter. So how long do we have? So the answer is, if the biggest countries collapse under mountains of debt, we will be left. Who will be left to save the world? If Japan goes down, like we talked yesterday, because Japan is doing things very similar to the US, if Japan goes down, the crisis will spread to the rest of the world. So in 2010, Japan's debt was 200% of GDP, and the United States is approximately 58.9% debt to GDP and is growing, and England's is 71% and growing. Now, this is when he wrote this book in 2011, so it's probably fluctuated around that time, and it's probably more than that now. So, and I didn't get a chance to go and look at the most updated numbers, but that's what he had at that time. FinEd definition. So debt to GDP ratio is the comparison of what a country owes to what it produces. So indicating the country's ability to pay back its debt. So an example, in Japan's case, their GDP is approximately 5 trillion, and the 4th largest economy in the world, and their report debt is approximately $10 trillion. So this is approximately $75,000 per person, Japan's debt to GDP ratio is similar to a worker earning $50,000 a year with a $100,000 credit debt. And to make matters worse, the worker is using credit cards to pay off the interest on their $100,000 debt, which is an action that increases debt. So it's just like somebody trying to use credit cards to pay everything down. It's just going to make it worse. It's not actually making it better, but it's giving it the illusion that things are getting better, but it's really not. So in simple terms, debt to GDP ratio is the country's credit score. So why is debt rising? The answer is the largest growing debt for the United States comes from Social Security, Medicare, or aka promises that we can't keep. So where the hold on, my computer is jumping all over the place. Hello, Brian Haig. Where the social promises, good Lord, can't talk this morning. Were the social promises made by Democrats or Republicans? And the answer is both. So Social Security was created under President Franklin Roosevelt, who was a Democrat, and during the last Depression. Medicare was created under President Lyndon Johnson, who was also a Democrat. And Medicare comes in three parts, which is A, B, and C. And Medicare Part C is one of the largest growing liabilities, and it was created under President George W. Bush, who is a Republican, and it was a multi-billion-dollar gift to the pharmaceutical industry, basically. So, are politicians to blame? No, the people are, and here is why. So politicians will say anything and make any promises to get elected. And once they leave the office, politicians receive their paycheck and their medical benefits for life, and the voters are left to pay off whatever promises that they couldn't afford. So this is why it helps to get educated on your finances, or financially educated, because then you start to make decisions about who's empowered differently. This is actually one of the reasons why I don't like talking politics with certain people, because they just don't get it. Because when you understand how money works and where money goes, you make decisions very, very differently. So we won't get into a political debate on here, but I'm just saying. How long can we go on? So no feet can't talk this morning, currency has ever survived. So the dollar has lost 90% of its purchasing power in the past 40 years. So it will not take much time for it to lose that last 10%, and there is only so much debt the system can actually tolerate before it actually collapses. So time to take action. What can I do? Reduce your risk. And how do you reduce your risk? By taking back some control and getting that education. So what do I do to take control of your education? And there are three things you need to learn. The first one is you need to learn how to sell. You want to control your income. Number two, you want to learn how to invest in real estate. That's how you're going to be able to control debt. Learn technical investing, which is controlling markets. So So the course, these three courses are important because people who want to be in the B and I quadrant that Robert Kiyosaki talks about, there are three courses that reduce risk, that Robert says that reduce the risk, and you can increase control in the B and I quadrant. So by learning those three things, you're going to have a lot more control over your situation, and you're going to be ready if something ever happens. Because yesterday we talked more about diversity, and here he's going to go over like, where do you need to go? So there's a lot of questions and answers in this chapter, but they are very helpful. So why do I need to learn technical investing? And this is to see, the reason you want to learn technical investing is you can see the past, present, and the future. So you start to be able to predict what's going to be able to happen. So by learning this skill, you're going to be able to create a chart and see when things are going up and down and what the market is doing, and then you're going to be able to predict what's going to happen a lot easier based on what's happened previously. Ooh, excuse me. So a different focus. So E and I's focus on income. B and I's focus on assets. So what is risky? The first group believes that investing is risky because they have limited, if any, financial education about assets. Investing is not risky, but the lack of financial education is very risky. The second group, which is the B and I quadrant, this group focuses on the assets, which teach them to manage assets and reduce the risk. So it's kind of like if you just hold a blind eye up to everything, you're basically going to be setting yourself up to either be taken advantage of or to have just a ton of stuff go wrong. Because a lot of people like to avoid any type of responsibility or anything that seems uncomfortable. But the problem is if you avoid it, people avoid until they're in a really bad situation. And then they're like, oh my God, I need to do something like yesterday. I'm like, yeah, but you should have done it when you were supposed to do it, because now it's too late. And that's the problem. People don't focus on these things until they are in deep shit. And then they're like, oh my God, can somebody come help me? When they could have just done it way ahead of time and they wouldn't have been in that situation in the first place. But that's also human nature. We like to wait until things are absolutely out of control until we do anything. But when you're aware of this, that's when you need to start taking action. So there's 4 different asset classes. So there's business, real estate, paper assets, and commodities. So the ability to sell, manage debt, and analyze market trends is essential to the 4 asset classes. So in real estate is an asset that requires the ability to control debt and manage property and tenants. So real estate is great because debt and taxes make the investor rich. So this is a great way for people to get started. And actually, I started taking my real estate classes last week. So I'm on my way. Paper assets. Robert and his wife Kim, rarely actually invest in paper assets because they offer the least control. So when you look at stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, the investor has zero control over the outcome, the expenses, the assets, and the liabilities. So they usually don't like to focus in that area just because there is the least amount of control. Commodities. Buying gold and silver coins takes the least financial education, yet you still need to know something about that asset class. Gold and silver do go up and down in price. Also, there are many con artists in the gold and silver business, especially today with prices climbing. So with this, you got to be very careful of whether or not you're actually getting real gold and silver. Because at one point I was looking at getting into jewelry flipping and watch flipping. And I started doing a lot of research of just how exactly you go about being like, okay, what gem is real? How do you tell a real diamond from a fake diamond? And I was looking at all these other things. It was actually really interesting. I ended up not doing it, but it was actually kind of cool to see just how exactly it works. Although what's funny is now I actually know how to identify enough stuff where if I'm buying something, I know whether or not it's real. So there was a plus side out of that. So which asset class is best for you? And the answer is whichever one you're interested in. So, but remember, a business creates the most of the truly wealthy people, but a business also takes the most financial education. Real estate requires the second highest financial education. Paper assets are easy to get into, but they are the riskiest. And commodities like gold and silver take the least financial education but are not risk-free. So they're not terrible, but they're not great either. But also, like with paper assets, the reason why they're so risky is because even with a diversified paper assets, because their idea is that we're going to go invest in multiple different things, so that way if something happens, you're going to be fine. But the problem is if the economy collapses, paper assets are the first things to go. So which class do most people invest in? They invest in paper assets. Paper assets are the most liquid, which means they are easy to get into and to get out of. So getting into paper assets requires the least financial education and zero sales skills and zero management skills. So you just have to go online, call the broker and say, hey, I'd like to buy 100 shares of this, or I'd like to sell 100 shares of that. And it's very easy to get into and have somebody manage that for you, which most people like to do just because of the convenience of it. So why do you invest more in paper assets? Or why don't you invest more in paper assets? And he's already talked about this before, but there's just not enough control. As an entrepreneur, you want to control your income, your expenses, your assets and liabilities, and the columns in your financial statement. So paper assets make few people very rich and have also lost trillions for unsophisticated investors focusing in stock market by the government laws. So laws which created pension plans such as the 401k in America. So that's how that came about. FinEd history. So in 1974, the United States government passed ERISA, which is the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. So the act actually became known as the 401k Act, and in simple terms, corporations were no longer willing to pay employees a paycheck for life because employees became too expensive and they couldn't compete with lower waging countries. So this is when a lot of people started to change their professions, and a lot of people actually went into financial planning. But the problem with financial planners is that they learn to sell in the S quadrant rather than the I quadrant. So they went from employee to small business owner when they should be learning from the investment category, where that would make sense, but they're not. So a good financial education is essential for knowing good financial advice from bad financial advice. And if you don't get educated on this, you really can't blame the investor if something happens to you. So whenever something happens with the economy, a lot of people are like, well, my investor didn't tell me this. And I'm like, well, honestly, your investor wasn't prepared for that. It's very rare for financial planners to actually know the answers to some of these questions, or to be able to predict some of these things, because they were only taught in the S quadrant, and that's not the right quadrant where you need to be working on. So how does a person make money and reduce risk in paper assets? Take classes and practice, or aka paper trading. You need to get smart about what's going on. It's not impossible to make money here, but you gotta make smart decisions. And you want to get insurance. So, Jeff is here. You gonna come join us? Cool. So you want to get insurance if you're going to start working in paper assets, but in the stock market world, they don't call it insurance, they call it hedging, or hedge. So it's like insurance. We can protect a relatively large amount of money against loss by spending a relatively small amount of money on the contract, such as a simple put option. So many professional investors would spend money on put options during times of uncertainty or anytime they face events that are out of their control. So you don't have to be a millionaire to take advantage of hedging. Although the irony of this idea is that many people label the options market as too risky. In reality, many people who purchase options are doing so to reduce their risk. So they use options as a hedge rather than speculation. So it's just one way to protect yourself if you are going to do it. That way, if everything is tied up, it's not going to financially devastate you either. So you just got to be smart about it. Can you print your own money with paper assets? And can I achieve infinite return on my investment? And the answer is yes. And he actually goes into more detail. This is something that is a little bit more complicated to be able to explain over this show. So if you are interested in more details about that, he does have a professional who talks more about it. But since this isn't something that he really focuses on, he wanted to hand it over to somebody else. So the next part is protect from Robin Hoods.
And literally Robin Hood, the app.
Oh yeah, that one too.
Tim, what's up?
Hello, Jeff is here. I was just making sure you weren't completely cut off, but you want to protect yourself from Robin Hood. So as the economy worsens and poverty increases, more people will turn into Robin Hoods, like steal from the rich to give to the poor. But in today's world, people steal just for themselves. It's not actually going to other people. But whenever the economy fluctuates, or when everything's going bad, everybody always points to the rich, and they're just like, I'm not doing well, so you need to help me, you need to give me money. Even though they did what they were supposed to do, that's just how it works. Everybody thinks, oh, well, they have the money, so you need to just give it to me, but that's not fixing the issue. And you also need to learn how to best protect yourself too, which Robert talked about this, and I had to learn this very early. When you start doing well, you have to learn how to protect yourself. Like, I don't tell people how much money I make. I don't broadcast over the internet certain lifestyle things, because what you end up doing is you end up painting yourself as a target. This is where anybody with a nice home or a nice car, things get broken into. You need a good security system. He even mentioned you need to buy a gun or have a dog. Although honestly, I've had both. And honestly, the gun was a little bit more reliable than my dog, because if somebody broke in, he would be like, hi, friend. Yeah, it does work. Yeah, do you have food? Come play with me. That's exactly what he does. But he just says you got to be able to protect yourself from these people, because as soon as things start happening where people's security gets shaken, then people start to come out and do stupid things, and you don't want to end up being a victim of that. So how do you protect yourself from the Robin Hoods? And the answer is use the laws of the rich. So get an alarm system. I already went over that. So in conclusion of this chapter, the best way to minimize your risk is by taking back control and starting your financial education. So true financial education gives you more control over risk, and and that control over risk is where you get that unfair advantage. So with that is what we have for this chapter. I don't know how much you were able to listen to on the way here. Do you have any comments?
Most of it, the main point is yes, you should invest. You just have to do the research first, and you have to get an education. You have to know what the terms are. What most people do, and the reason they're so far upside down and they have their issues, is they're listening to quote-unquote experts. I learned this a long time ago. This is the way they used to convince people to get investments. They would pick two opposing stocks, and they'd pick the same stock, and they'd send out two groups of letters, right? And let's just call it 1,000. So 1,000 to the left, 1,000 to the right of this, just groups, not like political groups, but just two different groups of people. One said the stock's going to go up, one said the stock's going to go down. And whatever happened, they would then pick that next group, whichever one was right, they'd pick that group of 1,000, and then they'd send out to that group of 1,000 and split it in half, 500, and basically say, hey, this one's going to go up, that one's going to go down, and they'd narrow it down again to 500. So now they've been right twice. They would do this in multiples of anywhere between 5 and 10, and then finally pick up the phone and call and say, hey, look, if you look back, I've been right 10 times. You should invest with me. And sometimes that's all the kind of training knowledge that they have outside of passing the licensure. And unfortunately, just passing to get your licensure is not what you want. Now, I'm not talking about all financial services people, and I'm not talking about all insurance people. This is something that happened a long time ago. From what I understand, it is now illegal to do that, but people still do it in different ways. Companies still do it in different ways. It's just advertised differently. But that's literally how they used to do it and get customers. When I realized that and how much horse shit the industry was, I wanted something that was more tangible. Grant Cardone is a guy that a lot of people are looking at and listening to right now, and he likes the idea, sort of like Robert Kiyosaki, of something that is an actual cash flowing asset that is already up and rolling. So he buys properties that are already cash flowing. He buys properties that are already built. He buys properties that are already built with a person in it paying rent. And then he has this basic like a chart, because he's an accountant by profession. He has this chart where he basically rates these different things. James, what's happening? So that's what Cardone does. Cardone looks for property that's already there, that's already producing cash flow, and then puts in an offer. And his goal is obviously to get a good deal, but he goes, in a lot of cases, if you have a great property that's cash flowing, you actually can overpay for the property itself. And here's what I learned yesterday. The price is irrelevant if you're setting the terms. The price is irrelevant if you're setting the terms. If somebody wants to sell you a $100,000 piece of property for $130,000, is that a good deal? And the answer is, depends on what the terms are. Because if the terms are, I can pay this off in 500 years, the terms are freaking amazing, because the asset's going to produce cash flow. If the terms are, you have to pay it off in 2 years, not so good of a deal. So it depends on what the terms are. The terms are the price is irrelevant if the terms are set by you. So basically what he's saying is you can make the numbers work out. So that's, Grant Cardone is one of the guys that talks about hard asset. Tony Robbins wrote a book called Money Master the Game and Unshakable, where he talked about, being able to earn a minimum of 10%. The hedge fund investors that are most successful in the world earn over 20%. And if you earn 21.2%, that means at 21.2%, your money would double every 3 years. So if you put $100,000 into the market, 3 years later, you'd have 200. 3 years later, you'd have 400. 3 years later, you'd have 800. 3 years later, you'd have 1.6 million. These guys are doing this in blocks of billions, and they're able to turn money that fast. Do they have an advantage over it? Yeah, they do. They have knowledge. You can do it with $10. You can also do it with $10 million. The suggestion is to start with $10 and improve from there, because everybody can get a hold of $10, no matter what your job is, what your background is. Turn $10 into $20. How fast can you do it? And not by stealing, but actually by, some of the things we're talking about, not by winning the lottery. But you have the ability, I'll give you an example, you have the ability to go to Facebook Marketplace, buy something for $10, whether it be a chair, a table, a desk, a toy, and turn around and sell it for $20 once you clean it up, spiff it up, whatever. You can turn money that fast. I have friends that do nothing but sell stuff online, and that's quote unquote they're investing. They're taking their money and doubling it and doubling it and doubling it and doubling it. So there's a bunch of different ways to do this. You just have to find your way, educate yourself, and figure it out. That's what I got.
All right, awesome. Well, it's good to see you again.
Yep.
So if you guys haven't yet, you want to go to the Top Producer Show Facebook page, and you want to join that group, because I'm going to put up the notes from this chapter, and I'm going to take the ones from yesterday and today, because this was very long, and I'm going to go ahead and post it on that page. So if you guys would like those notes, you can get them. And also, go follow us on YouTube. Each one of these videos is going to be uploaded to there, so if you'd like to go back and rewatch it, you are more than welcome to. So with that, that's what we have for you guys today. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you guys tomorrow for Chapter 5.